Because the next question is for you, Richard. It's
Right.
also from Stu, and it's about permissions and if you've got any tips about it. So you've discussed this in other episodes, but he's particularly asking because he'd like to take his children into nearby woods to practice shelter building and things like that. He already has permission for shooting rabbits, but it took him a long time to get it. So obviously he's capable of communicating with humans and bartering a bit, but do you have any kind of best approaches?
Don't lie. Don't do the ask for permission afterwards, or ask if forgiveness is easier to get. Yeah. Landowners are, with good reason, very suspicious about people doing stuff on their land, particularly if they haven't given permission for them to do it. So find out who owns the land, who owns which bit, and then do a bit of research on that person as well. Don't start looking at the bank account, but also, find out, well, are they a farmer? Are they somebody who the local community doesn't get on with because they are always in conflict with other people, or are they someone who's quite friendly and quite useful and quite helpful? And back to the barter economy thing, just make it an exchange. It shouldn't be, I want to do this. Why? Because I want to do it. Well, it's, I want to do this. Okay, what do I get out of it? Well, I can keep an eye out for litter, or we'll clear litter away when we do stuff, or let me know any fences that need some work on it that you can just bang a couple of staples in and resecure the wire. There's a never-ending list of jobs on a farm or extended bit of land, and if the person who owns it can trust you to do very minor maintenance work that would take time out of the landowner's day, then you can easily give them a service in return for something that won't otherwise cost that farmer anything.
Do you think it's also worth being very upfront with them and saying, so this is what I want to do. I want to take my kids there, teach them shelter building. We might also do X, Y, Z. Can we cut down small trees, that sort of thing?
Yes, but I would say don't say things like bushcraft. Say things like education, nature interpretation, that kind of thing. Yeah. Because most people outside of the world who are interested in it don't know what bushcraft is. Or they might have seen stuff on social media of people leaving like disposable £10 Tesco tents and a massive roaring fire behind, and think that's what is meant by bushcraft, wilderness skills, whatever. So don't assume that they know what you want to do. Try and explain it in a way that presents it in a good light.
And also perhaps talk about the fact that that any shelters that are built can also be then dismantled very easily if needed, or even just we build a shelter and then we'll dismantle it after we've finished sleeping in it, so that there's not left there, because that can encourage more people to do the same as well, can't it?
Yeah, and often that's what landowners are worried about. They're not worried about you doing it. They're worried about other people seeing it and then thinking that this is an acceptable behavior for anybody in this area. Because we have and manage a piece of woodland, and we've had that before where we've come across people engaging in all sorts of activities in there, and their excuse for it was, well, I saw there were these shelters and this classroom set up at one end of the wood, so we thought that's where it does it. This is where you come to do that kind of thing. And it is, yeah, it is where I come to do this kind of thing, but not as a general activity for the public. I don't know, Brian, what do you think?
No, I think you're right, mate. Definitely go and ask for permission, and you'll probably end up educating the people that you're talking to anyway by, as you say, using things like, I want to do this for education, to learn about nature, etc., and this is what we're hoping to do with my children, or with whomever it is. That's definitely the best approach. Do not just rock up in a local woodland and start hacking trees with a hatchet, setting up your Tesco tent, and then getting pissed overnight. I mean, this was all over my Facebook this morning. It was somewhere. This has happened over this weekend. There was like 3 or 4 guys who were in a woodland. It's in Derbyshire, and the landowner saw them, spoke to them, and they said, "Oh, yeah, we operate on leave no trace and blah blah blah," and the fire service were there the next day putting out the remains of the fire that had caught into the leaf litter and all that kind of stuff. And there was 2 great big bin bags full of shit that they'd left behind. So, you've got to be very, very sensible and very careful about what it is that you're doing, and be open and honest with the people that you want to do it with. Because if you do leave it in shit state, chances are you would definitely not be allowed back, and every other landowner in the area is going to know about it as well.
I'd also say that in the UK, I know there's certain organisations who own woodlands, so Forestry Commission or NRW as it is in Wales, and the National Trust as well, who sometimes have den building areas which are dedicated places. Because people were doing it naturally, they've created spots in some of their sites where it's okay to do that, and so that they know where it's happening, because often they have designated sites or areas that are particularly sensitive for wildlife, so they want to make sure that where you're doing things doesn't damage those. So they have specific areas, but obviously you're going to be restricted there. There's certain things like they probably wouldn't want you to have axes, and you might not be able to do fire lighting and things. So if you want that, then private land is more the route to go down, I'd imagine.
Yeah. Terry, just for a quick answer from the States, I know you've got sort of public land and things there, and then the other side of it, the trespass is much more controlled than it is here. Would there be an equivalent situation over there about asking permission from a landowner to do this kind of thing?
Where I live, absolutely. There is not, there's really not a lot of public land in my state. If you go out west, for instance, there are just literally millions of acres where it's, BLM, Bureau of Land Management, which is U.S. government, or basically it's not uncontrolled. I don't want to say that, but really effectively it is. We don't really have that where I live. Most of the land here is going to be farmland or, we do have some fairly large state and a national forest here. So, yeah, asking permission is definitely an issue here, whether you're looking for a place to camp or to shoot, which actually is a bigger thing. Like if you want to do much actual long range here, there really is no public land where you can do that. So you have to either know someone with a farm or make friends, with someone with a farm. And so, all of the same considerations apply. I've once approached someone that I didn't know at all to ask permission to shoot on their farm. And it was a spot that I'd been looking at for a long time. And I finally pulled over and, knocked on the door at a reasonable hour on the weekend once and, made sure I dressed halfway nice. And I wound up talking to the people for about an hour and a half. And I did get permission to shoot there and had permission to shoot there until they moved. So, but, it's all in your approach. I would be very wary of letting someone do that if I were in a position of having that kind of land. So I completely understood their concerns. And I think that, that probably went a long way when I said, hey, listen, in your position, I would probably tell me no, but, let me show you, and let me show you what I do and how I do it safely. And they were like, oh, well, absolutely. So
I've heard I've heard of through American podcasts and friends, the thing about hunting, particularly in turkey season or whitetail season in the States, that you've got a fairly good chance of turning up at someone's doorstep and say, we'd like to hunt so and so.
Yeah. Again,
species.
Well, we don't have so much. Well, actually, I take that back. Up until recently, we didn't have a lot of pest species around here, but the coyotes are really beginning to be out of control, and we're actually starting to get some wild hogs toward the southern part of the state, and of course, that's an invasive species. if you find a farmer that is having problems with things like that, and they're not really shooters. I mean, most farmers keep some guns around out of sheer necessity, but if they're having a coyote problem, a lot of the time, if they know you're going to be responsible, they'd be happy to have you in for a coyote hunt. So yeah, I mean, that's a good way to go at it. What am I going to do for you besides show up and use your land?
Yeah, exactly. There's got to be it's got to be transactional, hasn't it?
Sure. And I've always offered, in cases where it wasn't something like that would be a direct benefit, I've always offered to come out and put in a couple of days work, even putting up hay in their barn or something like that. And, I've done that a few times. So, I found that most people, if you put in a solid 12-hour day doing manual labor with them, they tend to think better of you at the end of the day.
Yeah.